Good afternoon, dear listeners. Today, I'm going to tell you a story about how greed and audacity get what they deserve. It's a tale about a married couple, where the husband and his mother thought they'd found an endless source of money. But what happens when patience runs out? Enjoy the listening. I met Leo at the city's 4th of July celebration. It was a warm summer evening, with colorful lights, fireworks, and loud music creating an atmosphere of carefree fun. I was 22, fresh out of college, and working at a small hair salon called The Curl on the edge of town. Ahead of me, a whole life full of possibilities. Leo approached me when I was standing by the fountain, watching the water spray, lit up by colorful spotlights, tall, with a charming smile and kind brown eyes. He seemed so confident and grounded. "Lost in thought?" he asked, offering me a cup of lemonade. "Just observing," I replied, accepting the drink, watching the water and the people. "And I'm observing you," he said with a smile. "My name is Leo Miller, but everyone just calls me Leo." "Diana," I introduced myself, and our conversation flowed easily and naturally. It turned out Leo was a process engineer at the local steel mill. The pay wasn't great, but as he confidently stated, he had plans for the future. We talked about everything: our small town, our dreams, the trips we wanted to take. "You know," Leo said, walking me home, "I believe we build our own lives. You just have to work hard and not be lazy. Then you'll have everything you want." Those words resonated with me. That's exactly what I thought. In my mind, I was already picturing my own beauty salon, happy clients, financial independence, and of course, a strong family. Our romance developed quickly. 3 months later, Leo introduced me to his mom, Martha. She seemed a little strange to me, always pursing her lips and eyeing me judgmentally. But I didn't pay it much mind back then. All my thoughts were on Leo. "Mom's retired," he explained as we left her shabby 2-bedroom apartment in an older building. "She worked as an accountant at the produce market her whole life, but she barely saved anything. You know. Her pension is tiny, barely makes ends meet." "It's okay," I said with enthusiasm. "When we get on our feet, we can help your mom." 6 months later, Leo proposed. We decided to have a small wedding, just close family and friends. My parents, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, insisted we live with them at first in their spacious 3-bedroom house. "Save up for your own place," Mom said, "and then you can think about living on your own." So we did. The first few months of our married life were carefree. I worked at the salon, Leo at the factory. In the evenings, we made plans for the future: how we'd save for a down payment on a mortgage, how I'd open my own salon, and how Leo would move up the career ladder or even start his own business. My parents didn't interfere in our lives, but were always there, ready to help with advice or practical matters. Money wasn't an issue. I gave Mom a small amount for household expenses. The rest we saved for the future. But after 6 months of living together, Leo started bringing up the idea of us living separately more often. "You don't understand," he'd say when I tried to argue that we needed to save a little more. "We need to learn to live independently. It's not normal for adults to live with their parents." Eventually, I agreed. We rented a small 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town and moved in, full of enthusiasm and plans. That's when our problems began. It turned out that rent, utilities, and ordinary household expenses ate up a lion's share of our salaries. Saving became impossible. We barely scraped by from paycheck to paycheck. "We need to grow," I told Leo one evening as we sat in the kitchen, counting our meager finances. "I want to take a makeup artist course. It'll broaden my skills, and I can earn more." "Where will you get the money for the courses?" Leo asked, frowning. "Every penny is accounted for. Maybe your parents can help," I suggested uncertainly. "No way," Leo exclaimed. "We're adults. We should solve our own problems." But when he came home a week later with a new smartphone, explaining the purchase as a work necessity, I realized I'd have to ask my parents. To my surprise, they agreed to pay for the courses without question. "Investing in education is always smart," Dad said, handing me the money. "Go for it, sweetie." The courses started and I dove into my studies. Leo, meanwhile, decided he also needed to increase the family's income and started looking for side jobs. First, he took on repairing friends' computers, but after he ruined a neighbor's expensive laptop, that idea fizzled out. Then there was an attempt at small appliance repair, which also ended in failure and additional costs for compensation. "Don't worry," I comforted my husband. "Not everyone is cut out to be a handyman. You have other talents." But Leo was deeply upset by his failures and became increasingly irritable. And then, it turned out I was pregnant. The news of my pregnancy initially brought mixed feelings. On one hand, joy. On the other, the realization that our already shaky financial situation would become even more vulnerable. "I'll have to put off my plans to work as a makeup artist," I said, looking at the 2-line test. "At least for a while." "Yeah," Leo agreed, hugging me. "Well, we'll manage. I'll work more." At that moment, I still believed his words. The pregnancy went smoothly, but with each passing month, it became harder to work at the salon. My legs ached, my back hurt, and the smells of dyes and other chemicals made me nauseous. Eventually, the doctor advised me to take an early leave from work, so we were left with just Leo's salary. Money was critically short. It was then that Leo first suggested, "Maybe we can ask your parents for a little money just to tide us over until payday." I was terribly ashamed, but there was no other choice. My parents, of course, helped without asking unnecessary questions. But what was supposed to be a one-time help gradually became a system. Leo started visiting my parents more and more often for financial support, sometimes even without telling me. "You went to my parents with your hand out again," I asked when I noticed an unexpected addition to our budget. "What's wrong with that?" Leo was surprised. "They don't mind helping. Don't worry. When we get on our feet, we'll pay everything back." I didn't know what to say. Inside, a nasty feeling grew that something was wrong, that our family boat was leaking, but I pushed those thoughts away. After all, we loved each other, and we'd handle the other problems. As the end of my pregnancy approached, the question arose of where we would live with the baby. Our rented one-bedroom apartment was too cramped and inconvenient for a family with a small child. And then my parents made us an incredibly generous offer. "Your dad and I thought about it and decided we'd move to the cabin," Mom said. "And you two can live in our apartment, at least for a while, until the baby gets a little older." I was stunned by such a sacrifice. Our cabin, though well-maintained, wasn't really meant for permanent living, especially in cold weather. "We can't accept such a gift," I objected. "It's not a gift, but a temporary solution," Mom insisted. "Besides, Dad has always wanted to live closer to nature. You know how much he loves messing with the garden." In the end, we agreed. Now, at least, we didn't have to pay for housing. After our son, Caleb, was born, the financial situation became even more strained. Expenses for the baby medicine, diapers, baby food all required money we didn't have. Leo started turning to my parents for help even more often, and I watched in horror as they cut back more and more on their own expenses to help us. And that's when Martha, my mother-in-law, started appearing more actively in our lives. Before, she hadn't been too interested in our affairs, but the birth of her grandson seemed to awaken her maternal feelings. She started coming to visit often, bringing old toys, helping with Caleb, and then she began complaining about her hard life. "My pension is next to nothing," she sighed, sitting on the edge of our sofa. "And prices keep going up. This month, I had to give almost my entire pension for the apartment." Leo nodded sympathetically, and then, when his mom left, he would pull a few $100s out of his pocket. "I need to help Mom. She's really struggling." I looked at him, bewildered. "Leo, but we barely have a penny to our names. We're struggling to buy diapers." "Mom's alone. Who will help her if not us?" he answered reproachfully. "You see what a tough spot she's in." And I gave in. After all, she was his mother. And if she really was having such a hard time, but an inner voice told me something was off, especially when I saw Martha with a new purse or in a new dress. While I juggled childcare and doubts about our future, a thought kept popping into my head. A thought I tried to push away, but that stubbornly returned. Did I make the right choice marrying Leo back then? I didn't know that very soon. I would have to face a truth that would turn my whole life upside down. Caleb was growing into a healthy, active boy. At 8 months old, he was already trying to stand, holding onto the edge of his crib, and happily babbling in his own language. I looked at my son and thought that for his sake, it was worth enduring all the financial difficulties and tensions that had arisen in my relationship with my husband. My parents' apartment became a real salvation for us. A 3-bedroom with a spacious kitchen and bright rooms. It was much more comfortable than our rented 1-bedroom, but even here, not paying for rent, we barely made ends meet. Leo stayed at work more and more often, explaining it as overtime, but the money didn't increase. On the contrary, it became even less. I started to notice that my husband behaved strangely when it came to the family budget. There were always some unforeseen expenses that he remembered only after the money had been spent. "Leo," I asked one evening when Caleb was already asleep and we were sitting in the kitchen drinking tea, "where did the money from your bonus go? You said you got an extra $5,000. My husband hesitated a bit, then answered without looking me in the eye. "You know, Diana. Mom called. She had some plumbing problems in the bathroom. The plumber came, had to pay him, and you gave her all $5,000. I felt a wave of irritation rise inside me. We agreed we'd buy Caleb a winter snowsuit. "Don't yell. You'll wake our son." Leo grimaced. "What do you want me to do? Leave Mom with a leaky bathroom? We'll figure out the snowsuit somehow. Maybe your parents can help." I closed my eyes and slowly exhaled, trying to calm down. Again. My parents. Always my parents. What if they weren't here? What if they couldn't or didn't want to help? What would we do then? "Leo, this can't go on anymore," I said quietly. "We need to learn to live within our means. And I don't understand why your mom constantly asks us for money. She knows we have a small child, that we barely make ends meet." "She doesn't ask." Leo suddenly flared up. "I offered to help when I saw the condition of her bathroom. You should have seen that rust, those leaks. It was unsanitary." "Okay." I got up from the table. "But next time, please, let's discuss such expenses together before you give away the last of our money." Leo grumbled something unintelligible and walked into the bedroom, slamming the door. I stayed in the kitchen, feeling traitorous tears stream down my face. What's happening to our family? Where did the harmony, the mutual understanding we once had, go? The next day, Mom called. She asked how Caleb was doing and, in passing, asked if we needed help with winter clothes for the baby. "Leo said you were going to buy a snowsuit." She said, "Dad and I can help." I bit my lip. So Leo had already talked to my parents, even without consulting me. "Thanks, Mom," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "But we'll manage on our own." Hanging up, I found my hands trembling with anger. When Leo returned from work, I met him in the hallway. "Did you go to my parents again to ask for money?" I asked directly, not even letting him take off his jacket. "Not to ask, but to talk," my husband corrected me, walking into the kitchen. "I just mentioned in passing that we needed to buy the baby a snowsuit. Your mom offered to help. I didn't ask for anything." "Leo, this is humiliating." I followed him closely. "You're a grown man, a father of a family. Don't you understand how this looks? We live in their apartment. We constantly take money from them. Where's your pride? And where's your gratitude?" he suddenly snapped. "Your parents help us because they love you and Caleb. It's normal to help your children. My mom would help too if she could, but she doesn't have those means." "Yeah, your mom just takes and gives nothing in return," I blurted out. Leo's face contorted with anger. Don't you dare talk about my mother like that. You know nothing about her. She worked like a dog her whole life to raise me alone, and now that she's old and sick, you want me to turn my back on her." I took a step back, scared by the look on his face. Never before had I seen my husband so enraged. "I'm not asking you to turn your back on your mother," I said quietly. "I'm asking you to think about our family, about Caleb, about our future." Leo took a deep breath, clearly trying to calm down. "I am thinking about our family. That's why I'm working overtime. That's why I'm looking for ways to earn more. If you really thought about our family, you wouldn't give the last of our money to your mother," I argued. "And you wouldn't go to my parents with your hand out." Leo clenched his fists but said nothing, just walked out of the kitchen. I heard him fussing with Caleb in the nursery, saying something sweet to him. From that contrast irritation with me and tenderness with his son, tears welled up again. That evening, we didn't talk anymore. Leo went to sleep in the living room, and I stayed in the bedroom with Caleb, lying in the dark. I tried to understand where we went wrong, when our relationship, which seemed so perfect, began to unravel. But the most unpleasant test awaited me. A few days after our argument, Martha unexpectedly appeared at our doorstep. She was wearing a new coat that I knew for a fact cost a good amount of money, and held a box with a cake in her hands. "Hi, kids," she exclaimed, walking into the apartment. "Decided to visit my favorite grandson." I invited her into the living room where Caleb was playing in his playpen. My mother-in-law sat down on the sofa, took out a small plastic toy car from her bag, and handed it to her grandson. He took it, but immediately threw it aside, returning to his blocks. "Spoiled," Martha remarked. "He has too many toys." I kept silent, though I wanted to argue that it wasn't about the number of toys, but that Caleb just wasn't interested in cars. He preferred building towers out of blocks. "How are you living here?" my mother-in-law asked, looking around the room. "Not a bad apartment. Your parents were lucky with their housing." "Yes, they managed to buy this apartment back in the 90s, I answered calmly. "They worked hard to provide for our family." "But I wasn't so lucky," Martha sighed. "Worked as an accountant my whole life and live in an old apartment, and my pension is next to nothing." I kept silent again, not wanting to enter this conversation, but my mother-in-law seemed to be waiting for just that. "Diana, I need to talk to you seriously," she said, changing her tone. "I've run into some financial difficulties. The utility company sent a bill for heating. $400, you imagine I thought it was a mistake, but it turns out they have some new rates, a recalculation for last year. Anyway, it's 2 weeks until my pension, and I need to pay now, or they'll charge penalties." I looked at her, not believing my ears. $400 for heating in an old apartment, that's absurd. "Martha," I began cautiously, "are you sure you understood the bill correctly? Maybe there's some mistake. $400 really. That's too much for a regular apartment." "You think I don't know how to read numbers," my mother-in-law retorted. "I worked as an accountant for 30 years, of course. I understood everything correctly. It's just some new calculations, higher rates. You know how it is. And you want us to, I didn't finish the phrase because at that moment, Leo walked into the room. He had just returned from work and, hearing his mother's voice, immediately went to us. "Mom, is something wrong?" he asked, kissing Martha on the cheek. "Yes, son, I'm in trouble." My mother-in-law immediately switched to a complaining tone. "The heating bill is $400 and I don't have that kind of money. It's 2 weeks until my pension, and I need to pay now." Leo frowned. $400? That must be some mistake." "No mistake," Martha exclaimed. "I already went to the management company, talked to them. Everything's correct. They have some recalculation for last year. New rates." I watched Leo think intently, clearly trying to figure out where to get such a sum. "Mom, we don't have that kind of money right now," he finally said. "You know our situation." I know. My mother-in-law nodded. "But I'm not asking for the whole amount. Maybe at least a part I've already asked everyone I know, borrowed from whoever I could. I'm short 150. 150. That was almost the entire sum we had so painstakingly saved for Caleb's winter clothes and my next advanced training course. I was planning to return to work as soon as Caleb got a little older and wanted to update my professional skills. Leo, I started, but my husband interrupted me. Mom, please wait for us in the kitchen. Diana and I need to discuss this. Martha obediently left, not forgetting to give me a scrutinizing look. As soon as the door closed behind her, I turned to my husband. Leo, we don't have that money. You know we saved it for other purposes. Besides, I don't believe an ordinary apartment can have such a heating bill. That's ridiculous. Why are you always so negative about my mother? Leo asked, irritated. Do you think she's lying? Why would she? I don't know why, I replied. But $400 for heating in a one-bedroom apartment is impossible, even with all the recalculations and new rates. It's just unrealistic. Are you an expert on utility bills? Leo asked sarcastically. My mother worked as an accountant for 30 years. Do you think she can't understand a simple bill? I think we need to see that bill first before giving away our last money, I insisted. Ask her to show you the papers. Are you serious? Leo exclaimed. I can't ask my mother for proof. She'll be offended. And I'll be offended if you give away our last money for who knows what. I raised my voice, and Caleb, sensing my mood, started to whimper in his playpen. Leo went to his son, picked him up, and started rocking him. Quiet, little one, quiet. Mommy and Daddy are just talking. He looked at me over his shoulder. Diana, this is my mother. She never lied to me. If she says she needs money to pay a bill, then that's how it is. I have to help her. And what about us? What about Caleb? I felt like I was losing control. We barely have enough for the basics. We live in my parents' apartment because we can't afford to rent, and your mother comes in a new coat with a cake and asks for $150 for some mythical bill. Shut up! Leo suddenly snapped, and Caleb, startled, began to cry loudly. Sorry, son. Sorry. My husband started rocking the baby even more actively, but he was already in full swing. I walked over and took my son from my husband's arms. Go talk to your mother, I said coldly, and I'll calm the baby. Leo left the room, slamming the door loudly. I sat on the sofa, hugging the crying Caleb, and felt tears stream down my cheeks. Something had definitively broken between us at that moment. Some invisible thread of trust connecting us had snapped. Half an hour later, when Caleb had calmed down and fallen asleep, and I was sitting in the bedroom looking out at the autumn rain, Leo entered the room. I gave Mom the money, he said without preamble. Everything we had saved. I didn't turn around, continuing to look out the window. So we'll buy Caleb's winter clothes on credit, I asked indifferently. Or will you go to my parents with your hand out again? Stop being so dramatic. Leo grimaced. We'll find the money somehow. Maybe I'll take on some extra work. Like last time, when you fixed the Smith's laptop and we had to pay them for a new one. You're unfair. Leo approached me. I'm trying for our family, for you and Caleb. No, Leo. I finally turned to him. You're trying for your mother, and Caleb and I are secondary. That's not true, he exclaimed. I love you more than anything in the world. Love is not just words, but actions. I replied quietly. And your actions say otherwise. Leo wanted to argue, but at that moment, my phone rang. It was Mom. Diana, dear, how are you doing? She asked. Dad and I are going into town this weekend. We wanted to visit you and Caleb. Everything's fine, Mom, I replied, trying to keep my voice normal. Come on over. We'll be happy to see you. When I finished the call, Leo was no longer in the room. I heard him rattling dishes in the kitchen. He always did that when he was upset or angry. He'd start doing chores vigorously. That evening, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. My mind raced with thoughts about our life, our future. My mother-in-law's strange behavior. Something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what. Why could Martha, who supposedly lived on a tiny pension, afford a new coat? Why could a heating bill for a regular apartment be $400, and why did Leo so fiercely defend his mother, not even trying to verify her words? The next day, I decided to share my doubts with Mom. My parents arrived after lunch, and while Dad played with Caleb and Leo went to the store, Mom and I were alone in the kitchen. "Mom," I began, stirring my tea, "we have money problems." "I figured." She nodded. "You've been so tense lately." What happened? I told her about my mother-in-law's visit, about the strange heating bill, about how Leo had given away all our savings without even checking the information. "And I don't know what to do," I finished. "I feel like Martha is just using us, and Leo doesn't want to see it." Mom looked thoughtfully into her cup. "You know, dear," she finally said, "I've wanted to talk to you about this for a long time. Your dad and I noticed that Leo asks us for financial help too often, and sometimes those requests don't seem justified." "What do you mean?" I became alert. "Last month, he asked us for money for Caleb's medicine, said he needed some expensive prescription medicine, but when I asked you about the baby's health a few days later, you said everything was fine, no problems." I felt the blood drain from my face. "He never told me he took money from you for medicine," I whispered. "Caleb really wasn't sick last month." Mom sighed. "I was afraid so." "Diana, dear, I don't want to interfere in your relationship, but maybe you should have a serious talk with your husband. Something's not right here." At that moment, we heard the front door open. Leo had returned. The conversation had to be cut short, but Mom's words were deeply ingrained in my mind. That evening, after my parents left and Caleb was asleep, I decided to check my suspicions. Leo was sitting in the living room, watching TV. I sat down next to him on the couch. "Leo, I want to ask you a direct question," I began. "Last month, did you take money from my parents for Caleb's medicine?" He flinched and looked at me in surprise. "What? No, of course not," he answered, but somewhat uncertainly. "Mom said you asked them for money for some expensive prescription medicine, but Caleb wasn't sick last month, so what was that?" Leo grew nervous, started changing channels on the TV. "I don't remember that. Maybe your mom's confused." "My mom isn't confused." Boo! I snatched the remote from him and turned off the TV. "Leo, I want to know the truth. Where did that money go?" He stood up from the couch and started pacing the room. "What is this? An interrogation? You don't trust me after everything that's happened." "No, I don't." I answered honestly. "So, where did the money go?" Leo stopped and looked at me defiantly. "I gave it to Mom. If you must know, she had some dental problems, needed urgent treatment." "And why did you lie to my parents? Why didn't you tell them the truth?" "Because your mother doesn't like mine." Leo flared up. "She wouldn't have given me the money if she knew it was for my mom." "My mom never refused to help," I argued. "But she has a right to know where her money goes. Just as I have a right to know where our family money goes." "Our money is my money too," Leo grumbled. "And I have the right to spend it as I see fit, even if those expenses jeopardize our son's well-being." I felt a wave of anger rise within me. "We barely make ends meet, and you're giving the last of our money to your mother, who for some reason is wearing a new coat, even though she supposedly lives on just her pension." "Don't you dare talk about my mother like that." Leo raised his voice. "She worked her whole life to provide for me. She has a right to a new coat once every 10 years, and $400 for heating. Does she have a right to that too?" I started shouting too. "Leo, wake up! You're being used! We're being used!" At that moment, Caleb's cries came from the nursery. Our shouting had woken the baby. I rushed to my son, leaving Leo standing in the middle of the room with his face contorted in anger. Rocking Caleb, I made a decision. This couldn't go on. Something needed to change, and change radically. And the first thing I would do was find out what was really going on with Martha and her finances. That night, when everyone was asleep, I took out a notebook from my desk and wrote a draft of a divorce petition. Not that I was ready to file it right away, but I needed to see those words on paper. I needed to realize that I had this way out, that I wasn't obligated to live in constant deception and financial stress. In the morning, Leo apologized. It was unexpected. He rarely admitted he was wrong, especially when it came to his mother. Standing in the doorway with his work bag slung over his shoulder, he looked guilty and lost. "Diana, I'm sorry about yesterday. I lost my temper. I don't want this wall between us." I nodded mechanically, stirring Caleb's oatmeal. My thoughts were far away, with that draft divorce petition I had hidden in my desk drawer. "We'll talk tonight," I just said. Leo lingered, as if expecting something more, but then just sighed and left. All day I was on edge. The thought that my husband and mother-in-law might be intentionally deceiving me kept nagging at me. I replayed all the strange incidents in my mind, all the inconsistencies in Leo's explanations, all of Martha's sudden bills and debts, and the picture became increasingly alarming. Around noon, my mother-in-law called. Her voice sounded honey-sweet. "Diana, sweetie, how are you doing? How's my favorite grandson?" "Everything's fine. Martha," I replied dryly. "To what do I owe the call?" "Oh, why so formal?" My mother-in-law laughed artificially. "I was just thinking, maybe I can help you with Caleb. You must get tired being alone with a child all day. I could come and sit with him while you take care of your errands." This offer surprised me. All this time, Martha had never been particularly eager to spend time with her grandson, limiting herself to formal visits once a month. "Thanks, but I'm managing," I replied. "I'm planning to go back to work soon. Actually, we'll be putting Caleb in daycare." "Daycare at such a tender age," my mother-in-law exclaimed. "That's irresponsible. Children in daycare are constantly sick." No, I'd rather babysit my grandson myself." Her persistence made me even more suspicious. "Martha, we haven't made a final decision yet. And besides, don't you have your own things to do? How's that heating bill? By the way, all sorted out." A pause ensued on the other end of the line. Yes, everything's fine," my mother-in-law finally said. "Thanks to Leo. He really helped out. You know, Diana, I wanted to ask you a favor. I need to go to my cabin to check if everything's okay before winter. Could you stop by my apartment and water my flowers?" "You have a cabin." I was surprised. Leo had never mentioned it. "Well, not exactly a cabin." My mother-in-law quickly corrected herself. "It's a plot of land with a small shack I inherited from a friend. Bless her soul. Nothing much grows there, but I need to check on it. So, will you stop by?" I agreed, already realizing this was my chance to check some things. "Of course. Martha, when are you leaving?" "Tomorrow morning I'll give Leo the keys today. Just make sure to water my orchid. It's on the windowsill in the bedroom. And check the mail in the mailbox. Some bills should have arrived there." When the conversation ended, I felt my heart pound with excitement. This unexpected chance to get into my mother-in-law's apartment without her present seemed like a sign. Perhaps there, I would find answers to my questions. In the evening, Leo returned from work in high spirits. He brought a cake and a bottle of wine to celebrate our reconciliation, as he put it. He also gave me the keys to his mother's apartment and relayed her request about the flowers. "It's strange that she suddenly decided to go to the cabin in late autumn," I remarked, trying to sound casual. "Did you know your mom had a cabin?" Leo hesitated for a moment, but then nodded confidently. "Of course. I knew. It's not really a cabin, more like a plot with a shed. She got it from an old friend. There's not even electricity there, but Mom likes to get away from time to time." I decided not to press further to avoid arousing suspicion. We spent the entire evening in a strained, polite atmosphere of reconciliation, talking about trivial things and avoiding sensitive topics. Leo played with Caleb, was especially tender with me, and even offered to wash the dishes after dinner, which was extremely rare. But I couldn't shake the feeling of falseness behind this show of care. Something dark was hidden, some secret that was carefully guarded from me. And tomorrow, I intended to uncover that secret. The next day, after putting Caleb down for his nap, I called a taxi and headed to my mother-in-law's apartment. Time was tight. I needed to get back before my son woke up. Fortunately, a nanny from the neighboring apartment agreed to watch the baby for a couple of hours. Martha's apartment was in an old 5-story building on the other side of town. The exterior of the building looked run down, with signs of years of repairs. I went up to the 3rd floor and opened the door with the key Leo had given me. Inside, the apartment looked modest but clean. Typical grandmotherly decor, old furniture, heavy curtains, crocheted doilies on the nightstands. First, I went to the kitchen to get water for the flowers. On the refrigerator, there was a magnetic board with some notes and phone numbers. Among them, I noticed the numbers 4321 to 68 with the initials WPN. This seemed strange, but I decided to come back to it later. After watering the orchid in the bedroom, I began to look around more carefully. The closets were filled with ordinary clothes. I didn't find anything luxurious or suspiciously expensive. In the bedside table were medicines, glasses, some utility bills. I checked the last one. The amount for heating was just over $20. Not $400, but only $20. My heart pounded faster. So I was right. Martha had lied about the bill amount. But why? And where did that $150 that Leo gave her go? I continued my search and found a safe in the closet. It was locked, and without the code, I couldn't open it. But a little to the side, behind an old Soviet-era coffee table, I noticed the corner of a folder. Moving the table, I found a thin folder of papers tucked between the wall and the furniture. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were documents, certificates of ownership for real estate, and not just for one apartment, but for 4. Besides the one I was in, Martha owned 2 more 2-bedroom apartments in new buildings and a 3-bedroom apartment in the city center. I sank onto the bed, feeling the ground slip out from under me. Martha, who constantly complained about poverty, about her tiny pension, who begged us for our last money. This woman owned 4 apartments and, apparently, rented them out, earning a substantial income. Now the strange numbers on the magnetic board made sense. These were probably the meter readings in the rented apartments, which she wrote down for herself. WPN, White Oak, Parkside, Northwood, the names of the streets where these apartments were located. I took pictures of all the documents with my phone, feeling a wave of anger rise inside me. All this time, they had been deceiving me, both Leo and his mother, extorting money for a struggling pensioner who was actually a wealthy homeowner. But the most painful realization was that Leo, my husband, the father of my child, knew everything. He couldn't not have known about his mother's property, and he still participated in this deception, begging for money from my parents, giving away our last savings supposedly to help his mother. In shock and numbness, I continued inspecting the apartment and found something else interesting, a notebook with entries. It was a kind of accounting ledger where Martha meticulously recorded her income and expenses. I quickly flipped through it, and to my horror, I saw entries about money received from us: $106 from Leo, $500 for medicine, $240 from Leo, $800 for bathroom repairs, $150 from Leo, $1,500 for heating, and next to it, in the expense column, $126 for boots, $400, $500, $260 for car repair, $780, $189 for a trip to the spa, $1,400. My mother-in-law had a car and went to spas on money we earned with such difficulty, money that could have gone to our small son's needs. I was so stunned that I didn't immediately hear the sound of the front door opening. Only when footsteps echoed in the hallway did I realize I wasn't alone in the apartment anymore. "Who's there?" Martha's voice rang out. There was nowhere to run. I stood in the middle of the bedroom with the incriminating documents in my hands, caught red-handed, but for some reason, instead of fear, I felt a strange relief. Everything secret had become clear. "It's me, Diana," I replied, stepping into the hallway. "I came to water your flowers, as you asked." Martha froze in the doorway, holding a travel bag. She was clearly surprised and alarmed by my presence. "Were you searching my apartment?" she asked, noticing the folder of documents in my hands. "No, I just happened to find it." I decided not to make excuses. Interesting reading, I must say, especially about the 4 apartments and the car, and the spa trip on our money. My mother-in-law's face changed, becoming hard and cold. "You had no right to snoop through my things," she snapped. "This is an invasion of privacy. I can report you to the police." "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied calmly, waving my phone. "I took photos of all the documents, including your ledger with records of how you spent the money you received from us, supposedly for utility bills and medicine." Martha's face changed. She walked into the kitchen and sat heavily on a chair. "What do you want?" she asked wearily. "Money. Are you going to blackmail me?" "I don't need your money," I replied, sitting opposite her. "I want to know the truth. Why did you pretend to barely make ends meet? Why did you extort our last money, knowing that we ourselves were in a difficult situation?" My mother-in-law snorted and pulled out a pack of cigarettes from her pocket. Another discovery. I had never seen her smoke. "You're so naive, Diana," she said, lighting a cigarette. "Do you think you can achieve anything in this world with honesty? I worked like a dog my whole life, started as a cleaner, then became an accountant, saved every penny, and what? By 50, all I had was this pathetic apartment." She blew a stream of smoke at the ceiling. "And then the 90s came. Everyone around was grabbing whatever they could, and I decided enough was enough of being an honest fool. I started moonlighting as an accountant, under the table. Money came in. I invested it in real estate when prices were at rock bottom. And I did the right thing. Now these apartments are worth 10 times more. But why pretend to be poor in front of us? I didn't understand. You could have helped us instead of taking our last money." Martha laughed, but it was a humorless sound. "Help you? Why, you married Leo, not because he was a rich heir. I'm not obligated to provide for your family." "But we're not obligated to provide for you either," I retorted, "especially when we ourselves are barely making ends meet." "Well, that's none of your business," my mother-in-law snapped. "Leo is my son. He should take care of his mother. It's his duty." Even if that care is based on lies, even if his own child suffers because of it, I felt anger rising inside me. "By the way, does Leo know about your apartments?" My mother-in-law hesitated, then reluctantly nodded. "Of course. He knows. Not everything at once, but I gradually told him. He understands that it's my private business how I manage my money." This confession was the last straw. So Leo knew everything and deliberately deceived me. My husband, whom I trusted, with whom I planned to spend my whole life, turned out to be a liar. "I'm going home," I said, standing up. "And we'll talk again, but in Leo's presence." "Just try to make a scene," Martha said threateningly. "Leo will always be on my side. You know blood is thicker than water." "We'll see," I replied, and walked out of the apartment. All the way home, I tried to gather my thoughts. How should I act? What should I say to Leo? Is it even possible to save our marriage after such a betrayal at home? Another surprise awaited me. Leo had returned from work earlier than usual and had already picked Caleb up from the nanny. They were playing together in the living room when I walked in. "Where have you been?" Leo asked, without looking up from playing with his son. "I called, but you didn't answer." "At your mom's," I replied calmly, watering her flowers, as she asked. "Oh, right." He nodded. "How is everything? Is it all normal?" "Depends on what you call normal." I walked into the kitchen, and Leo, sensing something was wrong, followed me, leaving Caleb with his toys. "What happened?" he asked when we were alone. I took out my phone and showed him the photos of the documents I had taken in his mother's apartment. "This is what happened. Leo, your mother owns 4 apartments that she rents out. She has a car and money for spas. And all this time you knew about it but kept extorting money from my parents, supposedly to help your struggling mother." Leo turned pale and sank onto a chair. "You were digging through my mother's things." That's all he could manage to say. "Don't try to change the subject." I shook my head. "Answer me directly. Did you know your mother owned several apartments?" He was silent for a moment, then reluctantly nodded. "I knew, but it's her private business how she manages her property. And deceiving Caleb and me and my parents is also her private business." I felt my voice trembling. "Leo, do you even understand what you were doing? You were extorting money through deception, money that could have gone to our son's needs. You're misunderstanding everything." Leo began to justify himself. "Yes, Mom has apartments, but they're all mortgaged to the bank for loans. She has huge debts. The rental income barely covers the payments." "Stop lying." I threw a printout of a page from Martha's ledger, which I had managed to make at the nearest copy center, onto the table. "Here, in black and white, your mother spends our money on boots, car repairs, and spa trips money you supposedly gave her for medicine and utility bills." Leo picked up the printout and stared at it for a long time, as if not believing his eyes. Then he slowly looked up at me. "I didn't know," he said softly. "I swear, I didn't know she was spending the money on that. She said she needed it for medicine, for repairs." "But you knew she had apartments she rented out," I persisted. "You knew she wasn't struggling like she claimed." "Yes, I knew," Leo admitted. "But she's my mother, Diana. She made me promise not to tell anyone, even my wife. She said she was afraid of robbers, of the tax authorities, that she wanted everyone to think she was just a simple pensioner. And for that, you lied to me. Your wife." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "You betrayed me. Leo betrayed our family." He tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. "Diana, please, let's talk calmly. I understand I'm wrong, but I can fix everything. I'll talk to Mom. We'll return all the money." "It's not about the money," I exclaimed. "It's about trust. How can I live with a man who lied to me for years? How can I trust you after this?" At that moment, Caleb peeked into the kitchen, drawn by our loud voices. His little face was worried. "Mommy," he called uncertainly. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "It's okay, sweetie," I said, picking my son up. "Mommy and Daddy are just talking." I carried Caleb to the nursery, put him down for his nap, and when I returned to the kitchen, Leo was no longer there. I found him in the bedroom. He was sitting on the bed, holding the draft divorce petition I had found in the drawer. "So you've already decided everything," he said bitterly. "You don't even want to try to save our family." "I don't know, Leo," I answered honestly. "I thought about this even before I found out about your mother's apartments. Our marriage has been falling apart for a long time, and it's not just about money, it's about us becoming strangers to each other." "I can change." His voice trembled. "For you and Caleb, I'll cut off all contact with Mom if I have to." "You know that's impossible." I shook my head. "She's your mother, no matter what, and you'll always feel responsible for her. And I can't live with a man I don't trust." At that moment, Caleb's cries came from the nursery. I stood up to go to my son, but Leo stopped me, taking my hand. "Let me," he said. "I want to be with him." I nodded, and Leo went to the nursery. Through the slightly open door, I saw him pick Caleb up, gently rock him, saying something softly, and my heart ached. Despite all the problems between us, Leo was a good father. He sincerely loved Caleb, and now our divorce would deprive our son of a complete family. But I saw no other way out. It was impossible to continue living in this web of lies. When Leo returned to the living room, Caleb was already asleep in his arms. "He's so calm with me," Leo said with a sad smile. "Always falls asleep quickly because he feels your love," I replied. "You're a good father, Leo, and I will never prevent you from seeing your son, but we need to make everything official: divorce, child support, visitation schedule." He nodded and gently laid Caleb back in his crib. "I understand," he said, returning. "Let me at least stay here a little longer until I find a new place. I promise I won't bother you." I agreed, and for the next 2 weeks, we lived like polite roommates. We greeted each other in the mornings, discussed household matters, and took turns caring for Caleb. Leo searched for an apartment. I prepared for the divorce proceedings. The day before the first court hearing, Martha came. She looked unusually modest, without flashy jewelry, in a simple gray dress. In her hands, she held a package. "I need to talk to both of you," she said when I opened the door. "It's important." I reluctantly let her into the apartment. Leo, hearing his mother's voice, came out of the living room. "Mom, is something wrong?" Martha placed the package on the table and sat down. "I came to talk about tomorrow's court hearing," she said, "and your divorce in general." "Mom, we've already decided everything," Leo began, but his mother-in-law interrupted him. "Be quiet and listen. I've been thinking a lot in the last few days about my life, about your relationship, about what I've done, and I've come to the conclusion that I was wrong." I looked at her in surprise. Martha admitting her guilt. This was something new. "I did indeed deceive you," she continued. "Extorted money, pretended to be poor. It was wrong, especially towards Caleb. He's innocent." She took a folder from the package and placed it on the table. "Here are the documents for the 3-bedroom apartment in the city center, the one you learned about from my papers. I've transferred it to Caleb's name. This is my gift to him and my apology to both of you." I stared at the folder, not believing my ears. An apartment in the city center, in Caleb's name. It sounded too good to be true. "Why?" I finally asked. "Why are you doing this?" Martha sighed. "I don't want to lose my son and grandson." She simply said, "If you divorce, if this whole story of deception comes out in court, I'll lose them. You have every right to turn Caleb against me, to forbid him from communicating with me, and I don't want that. So this is a bribe," I clarified. "An apartment in exchange for the chance to see your grandson. Call it what you want." My mother-in-law shrugged. "For me, it's a way to atone for my guilt and keep the family, even if it's in such a strange form." I looked at Leo. He looked as surprised as I did. "Mom, are you sure that apartment? It's worth a fortune." "I'm sure," Martha nodded. "I'm not getting any younger. Leo, what's the point of all these apartments if I'm left alone, without family? Money doesn't warm the soul." I cautiously opened the folder. Inside were indeed the documents for the apartment, registered in Caleb's name. Everything looked legal and official. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "This is unexpected." "Don't say anything." Martha stood up. "Just think about it. Maybe you should postpone the divorce. Try to save the family for Caleb's sake." She headed for the door, but stopped and turned. "And also, I won't interfere in your lives anymore. No more requests, no more manipulations. I promise." When the door closed behind her, Leo and I stood in silence for a long time, looking at the folder with the documents. "Do you think she's sincere?" Leo finally asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But even if it's just a way to buy us off, an apartment in Caleb's name is good. It will secure his future. So you're accepting this gift for Caleb?" "Yes." I nodded. "But it doesn't change our situation. Leo, we're still getting divorced." He looked at me with a long gaze. "I understand," he said softly. "And I won't try to convince you anymore, but I want you to know, I will always love you and Caleb, and I will do everything to be a good father to our son." The next day, Our first divorce hearing took place. Everything went surprisingly smoothly and without incident. I didn't mention the deception on my mother-in-law's part and limited myself to the standard phrase, irreconcilable differences. Leo didn't object to Caleb staying with me and agreed to child support equal to a third of his income. When we left the courthouse, a light rain was falling. Leo pulled up the collar of his jacket and looked at the gray sky. "You know what's most ironic about this whole story?" he asked. "That I really have every chance of getting a promotion at work soon, and then I could provide for you and Caleb without any problems. But it'll be too late. Life often works that way," I replied. "Important things. You realize too late." He nodded and awkwardly shook my hand. "See you Sunday? I'll pick Caleb up at 10 Hussars as we agreed." "Of course," I smiled. "He'll be waiting for you?" I watched Leo walk away on the wet sidewalk, hunched against the rain, and felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. One chapter of my life had ended, but a new one was beginning. And now Caleb and I had a chance for true happiness, without lies, without manipulation, without the perpetual feeling of financial insecurity. A month after our divorce, Martha called me. "I'd like to see my grandson," she said without preamble. "If you don't mind, come Saturday," I replied after some thought. "Caleb will be happy to see you." "Thank you." There was sincere relief in her voice. "I'll bring him a gift." "Just not too expensive," I requested. "He doesn't understand the value of things yet." "Okay," she agreed. "And Diana, I truly regret what happened, that I ruined your family." "You didn't ruin our family, Martha," I replied calmly. "It was ruined by lies, from both sides." After that conversation, my relationship with my ex-mother-in-law became strangely neutral. She came to see Caleb once every 2 weeks, brought small gifts, played with him, told him stories. She never stayed longer than 2 hours and never discussed Leo or our divorce with me. And I started a new life. I went back to work, finished my makeup artist courses, and slowly started building up my clientele. My parents helped with Caleb, but now I tried not to abuse their kindness and more often managed on my own. One day, about 6 months after the divorce, a woman came to me for a makeup session who turned out to be a real estate agent. "You know," she said while I worked on her face, "a wonderful studio apartment just became available in your area. Small, but very cozy, and at a good price. Perhaps you'd be interested." I smiled and shook my head. "Thank you, but I already have an apartment. Actually, 2. This one where my son and I live now, and another 3-bedroom in the city center that he inherited from his grandmother." The woman raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Wow, your son is lucky with his inheritance." "Yes." I nodded, continuing my work. "You could say it was compensation for being deprived of a complete family." The realtor sighed understandingly, apparently assuming I was referring to the death of a relative, and changed the subject, and I thought about how strange life is, how avarice and greed can destroy seemingly strong relationships, and how money, which became the cause of our breakup with Leo, ultimately secured our son's future.